This is episode 76 of the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I'm Carly Cade, and today Natalie Keller Reinert is returning to the show. Natalie has been riding and working with horses since the age of 10 and has worked in upper-level eventing, dressage, racing, and mounted patrol. She started publishing in 2011 following the launch of a very successful blog, Retired Racehorse. Since then, she has written and published more than a dozen novels written about the equestrian experience. We're going to take a deep dive into book production in this special edition two-part interview series. In today's episode, we're diving deep on book cover design, and next week we'll be discussing interior design. Now, let's get into the interview. Welcome to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast, a podcast featuring interviews with equestrian authors who love all things horses and writing about them. In each episode, you'll hear inspirational stories from horsebook authors, including writing advice and marketing tips to help you write your very own horsebook. If you're an author, aspire to be an author, or simply love horsebooks, then you are in the right place. I'm your host, Carly Cade, and creative writing makes my spurs jingle. Hi everyone, welcome to the Equestrian Author Spotlight. I'm Carly Cade, and today I'm so excited to have Natalie Keller Reinert on the show for a second time. And today we're going to talk about some really interesting stuff. We're talking book design, formatting, book covers, and she's going to give us all the insider advice that we need to make sure our books look perfect before we hit publish. Welcome to the show, Natalie.
Hey, thank you. It's really fun to be back again. It's so much fun last time and just really excited.
Yay. It's so exciting to be able to talk to you and have these sort of interviews because I've always looked up to you and I think you're doing excellent work in the equestrian fiction genre. But the reason why we're here today is because you actually consult with fellow authors on designing their books. So I thought we could start off the conversation since you've already been on the show. We know your history with horses and we know a lot about you, and I'll make sure to link to the previous episode so people can go back and listen to that. But since we're talking book design, I thought a great way to start the conversation off would be, what are the common traps that authors get into when they finish their manuscript?
Well, let's assume that they finish their manuscript the second or third or fourth time, first off, because the most common trap is to assume that you're done after you've written your first draft. And that's a whole other layer of editing and beta readers and things like that. But when you do feel like you have a book ready for production, I think rushing to production, number one, is a big issue where you don't spend the time on the finished product. Everything is worth a first and a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth glance every time. And if you thought you were tired of your book before, wait until you start putting together an ebook and a paperback. Oh, you're just going to hate that book. And there's going to be times where you might just feel like, maybe I'm just going to delete this paragraph because it won't format correctly. Was it that important? I mean, it was just a big giveaway, but if I can't get this page spacing to work out, let's move on without it. It can be a maddening process, but you have to go slowly when you're designing your book. And you have to remember that halfway with book design going forward is not good enough. There was a time when you could just put everything out in the same, sort of, this is in Times New Roman because I know they're going to adjust it on their Kindle or what have you, and the chapter heading is just in italics and things like that. And the one reason we could get away with kind of light processing on our ebooks in particular was because big publishers they were putting out really basic products, and they're not anymore, especially if you write in a genre with more lighthearted text like romance, for example, especially contemporary romance, funnier romance. They're putting a lot of effort into graphics and cute fonts, things like that. And you have to keep up if you want to look like you belong in that pack. So there's that piece. There's a rushing to production piece and really taking the time to create this really polished item. The other piece I want to touch on is advice and who you take your advice from. We all know we're not supposed to take advice from our friends. We're not supposed to put two covers together on our Facebook page and say, "Hey guys, tell me which one you like best." One cover might look great next to another cover, but is it going to stand on its own in its category against 20 other covers? And knowing your category is the third trap that I wanted to touch on. You have to be really, really clear with yourself, with your audience about what category you belong in. There are hundreds of categories to sell your books in, all of these subgenres. Even if you're just writing a horse book, there are dozens of subgenres of horse book. Do your books match your fellow books? I'll go ahead and say competitors, even though we all work together on this. Do your books match your competitors? Does your book look similar? Not the same, but similar in design to your competitor. So you have to be really, really sure that your category matches your cover design. Sometimes it can be hard to say what category your book really belongs in. You have to be honest with yourself. And if you have a great beta reader group, you can talk to them about it, or you can email another author and you can ask them. But you need to get that really, really clear right away. Because if you miscategorize your book, you miscover your book, you're going to turn off readers right away.
Wow, that's a big, huge opening pile of advice for authors to consider. And you touched on some really important things, and I think we're going to unpack that as we move into the interview here. This is about book design, this interview, but I wanted to touch really quickly on what you said earlier about editing, copy editing, beta readers. Can you share with listeners a little bit more, particularly for independent authors, why that process is so very important before I think you even get into book design and working with a professional, because you cannot edit something that you've spent so much time with on your own because you kind of stop seeing it. Why is it so important to go through that editing, copy editing, and then advanced reader sort of process?
Well, it's kind of like when you're at work and something is broken and nobody can figure out why, so you call in somebody else for that extra pair of eyes. That's its most basic level, right?
Mm-hmm.
For editing, like a developmental edit, when somebody goes in and makes notes on your story and gives you feedback on your story, I think one of the biggest benefits of that is that you don't know what you don't know about writing. Some of us are innate storytellers. We love to tell a story, but maybe we're not the most technically gifted writer. Some of us are the opposite. We're very, very good at crafting lovely copy, but our plotting is off. Our pacing is off. Our characters are flat. So both of those paintings are missing the input, of another piece. And so, any kind of editor can, even if it's not a line edit where they go, right, I'm giving you 50 pages of track changes on your book, but somebody to say, this character isn't doing it for me. What if gave them a quirk, described them, made them speak like their age group? These are all really common mistakes, like where maybe you'll write a young adult novel, but in a very adult sort of formal way. Or, the exact opposite, you write an adult novel in like the most basic sentences possible, and it just needs a little oomph. It needs a little art. So there are a ton of courses and books that can help you produce that, even if you don't have a full line by line, you need to fix this kind of edit. You can read about it. There are lovely books on the market to help you spruce up your writing, spruce up your story. There are programs to do it for you. But that is something when I do read manuscripts, like first drafts, to give an opinion, like a critique. It's one of my Patreon levels is to do a first chapter critique or a chapter every month. And a lot of times what I'll get is somebody who's passionate about the story they want to tell, but their writing just needs to be pulled together and tightened up. It's not hard to do. It's hard to see for yourself. Mm-hmm. So that whole editing piece, that's part of the development of your book. Mm-hmm. Copy editing, your proofreading, that's something. For one thing, you'll find a million typos throughout your book.
Yes, that is for
You will
sure.
find that. Your beta readers will find that. Your spouse will find them. Your judgmental child will find them. Everyone will find typos for you, and you will send your book out with a few typos,
Mm.
but not dozens and not hundreds. When I'm doing book design for somebody, I will often sort of make recommendations when I see something that's over the top. And the three things I think about the most are white space, right? So, and it kind of leads into my chapter break length, but white space is about your paragraphs and how often you're giving your readers' eyeballs a break.
Mm.
And that's a basic of digital copywriting that carries over into ebooks. And since most of us are writing primarily for an ebook audience, considering white space is really important. Now, I'm very guilty of long paragraphs, but I do consider them, and they have been longer.
Mm.
So, and then chapter length is a really big one. Like, are your chapters sort of evenly length? You know, are your chapters 2,000 words? Are they 1,500 words? That kind of thing. If one chapter is 6,000 words and the others are all 2,000, I'm going to mention it and be like, maybe we should think about, maybe it's not my place. Maybe I'm just a nosy person, but I really just want everybody to have just the best product possible, you know?
Absolutely. And editing and copy editing and proofreading to catch those errors and improve upon the story is an important investment to make. And I think you touched on something really important, which is educate yourself on and talk to people and on the fundamentals of these different things, because when you go to write your story, you don't often think about all the stuff that happens on the other side, which is why this interview today is so important, that goes into releasing the very best product that you can. So, and I imagine even though you do editing and copy editing, you do work with someone else to edit your stories, I would imagine. Is that right?
I do. It's really in-house. It is my husband. He is an editor. So I have
Mm.
that going for me. He's actually working on a book for me right now in the other room. But I have a very serious writing background. Like, for me, pacing and plotting have always been my issue. My sentences, don't mess with my sentences. I do what I want. They're fun for me. But yes, and I also have many, many beta readers and many, many people on the lookout for typos before a book goes out.
Mm-hmm.
So they get fine-tooth combed by multiple sets of eyeballs besides my own. And that's huge.
And that's part of your Patreon package too. If people support you through Patreon, they get an early read of your books. They become like your beta readers. Is that right?
That is right. And that is a really fantastic way to get feedback, because they get the book before anybody else. I send out advanced reader copies usually well before I've even started prepping it for actual production. When I just feel like I'm comfortable with the draft, I might make a few changes to it. I send it out and say, hey, whatever you find, if it's story or format related, let me know.
That's great. And it has to be exciting for your Patreons too, to be able to participate and assist you that way. And it's amazing how, when you send advanced copies out, how one person will find such and such, but then completely miss another, several typos that another person will catch. That's why getting various eyes on it is so important to catch those things. So you've already given us a lot to consider. Let's sort of narrow down the discussion to book cover best practices. What are some tips that you would suggest when people are thinking about book cover? You already mentioned, research your genre, make sure it stands with the other books in the genre. I think particularly for horse books, I'd love to hear your insight on, does a horse on the cover matter? Is that important? But you also have some tips that you can share with authors who are not designers or don't have a designer background. So let's start talking about some tips on things to consider with book cover design.
Yeah. I do think the most important thing is to research your genre. So like you just mentioned, you have to be honest with yourself about what are the people reading? What are your potential readers reading right now? How can you say this is like that? Especially for Kindle Unlimited, free books, anything where you're chasing down voracious readers, people who are going to finish a book and start another one without putting their Kindle down.
Mhm.
No pauses. Those are the those are the people you want, right? So they're looking for, a lot of people are looking for the same book told differently. And how differently you tell it, that's a whole other story. But getting the book cover right to match that category is just massive. And you have to be honest with yourself, because I've seen people before say, "Oh no, it's this." And the readers are saying, "Oh no, it's that." And the cover is somewhere else. When it comes to tools to use, I think you asked about tools.
Well, before we move to tools, if someone doesn't have a design background, I mean, essentially,
Mm.
I think the recommendation would be work with a professional. But before we go there, when you're, I think one thing I wanted to clarify is that readers generally know what they like and they read within a specific genre. Like I read all over the place, but a lot of readers aren't like that. They keep reading the same thing. And the reason why you're saying research your genre is because readers identify with the covers because there's sort of a criteria in cover design for specific genres. And if they're looking for something that resonates with them based on the things that they like to read that they've read before. Just I want to make sure that was clear to read. So for example, cowboy romance
Mm.
always has a similar type of cover. There's a tall, dark, and handsome cowboy with a cowboy hat and a woman. They're usually like in a suggestive pose, like leaning in for a kiss or hugging or, something sort of
Mhm.
country-ish going on in the background, but they always pretty much look the same, right? But but what's interesting is in our genre, equestrian fiction, there are the subgenres. But as far as having a horse on the cover, what are your thoughts there with kind of like how the books for equestrian fiction should look?
Sure. So you're right. The most basic and most successful equestrian fiction cover is a horse picture. And it works. I use it consistently across all my titles. I hardly ever put people in my covers. I use horses. Horse pictures can convey the mood of the book. The covers that I use for my eventing series look nothing like the cover that I use for Grabbing Mane.
Mm-hmm.
They evoke completely different emotions and they say what's in the book. Eventing series is a fast-paced, high-stakes book about professional eventing series. And Grabbing Mane looks a bit like a romance because I really wanted to convey this horse is taking over this person's life like a first love would.
Mm-hmm.
It's an emotional, oh my God, I love my horse cover. It's got nothing to do with competition. So you can say, yeah, it's a horse picture, but the mood is everything. And then there's the important, I'm writing for horse people. Horse people are very opinionated. Will I start a fight with horse people by using this cover? I have some specific rules for stock photography that I use. Helmets. If there's a person in it, and there's almost never a person in it, like I said, but if somebody were for me to consider a book, that person has to be wearing a helmet. I'm not getting into that conversation again.
Mm-hmm.
Bits.
Mm.
The horse, unless it's an upper level dressage horse, I need that horse to be in a plain bit, plainest bit possible. My book cover is not the place to start a discussion about whether a horse should wear a pelham or an elevator or hackamore or anything. Just a snaffle bit, all right? Just make it simple. And if any stock photographers are out there, we need more snaffles. Make your lives easier. We don't want to fight. And and it's basic stuff like that. Just sort of what do horse people fight about? Okay, avoid those things
Mm-hmm.
at its most basic. I had an almost gaffe earlier this year with that. I was recovering the eventing series and I chose gorgeous dressage horse for Pride. He was the right color. Everything about that picture worked for me. It was so symmetrical. I love symmetry. He was very slightly behind the vertical, meaning, he was a little tiny bit overbent on the bit. And people came after me when I said, how do you like this cover? And they're like, he's behind the vertical. I said, okay. New picture. I can't have this conversation. New picture.
Wow. Yeah, that
And I'd
is.
already bought it, folks. But you know what? It's a small price to pay to buy a new photo and redesign to avoid offending people.
Mm,
People have very strong opinions. It's not my place on the cover to upset them. I might upset them on the inside, but I try not to. It's not really my thing. So, yeah, you can't be too cautious with a horse photo. You
mm.
really can't. So, if you can convey the mood without starting a fight, you're in a really good place.
And do you have copies of the Venting series and Grabbing Name right there, so you could hold up and show to the people watching us on YouTube the difference between the two? I love all of your covers, particularly Grabbing Mane, because I think you absolutely nailed the love between a woman and a horse, and then that romantic feeling. So I just wanted people watching us on YouTube to be able to see the difference between the two.
So, this is the cover of Grabbing Mane. We got that in there? Okay.
Mhm.
So we've got this woman leaning back against her horse. Her eyes are closed. She's got a manicure, which I think is a fun little like leftover from her previous life. It's not dead yet. And so, it's just like it's definitely like a first love romance kind of picture, but instead of a guy, there's a kind of bored looking horse. And I really think it says it all. Now, the most fun thing about this for me is that I did ask for advice. Not always, I sometimes will put a bunch of cover images into Patreon and let my readers there give me their opinions. And not everyone liked this
Interesting.
and said it was too romancy.
Mm.
Some other things, I don't really remember everything. And I really did take all of their advice under consideration. And in the end, I decided to go with my gut and that this was the one. And it's been phenomenal. And this came with some interesting design issues. For some reason, see how there's this sort of bokeh like yellow sun flare right here,
Mm-hmm.
and then the little curl of the M. KDP, Amazon's printing arm, couldn't make that render. It would suck the color out of the M's curly Q.
Hmm.
And so in the cover of the ebook, this curly Q is much further over. I had to move the whole word over to make it work.
Wow, little tiny glitches like that
Hmm.
that you wouldn't anticipate. And
And
it's just
it's not in any of the previews. It's not in the PDF that I created. It's not in Photoshop. It's only in the finished copy. So in contrast to that, the Eventing series has got really high stakes kind of covers. For example, Courage, the new cover of Courage. The old one was also an action shot, but when I changed them out, I went for brighter colors. And so you've got this one, obviously galloping cross country. The first one, this book
Mhm.
sells itself with this cover. In case you're wondering, I can go to a book signing and put 6 books on the table, and people pick up this book every time. People who don't know anything about horses pick up that cover.
That's a beautiful cover. I mean, it's the black background with the bold gray horse on the cover, and it's just very
It's
clear.
unstoppable.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
gorgeous.
And it's actually a color photo, which is what's really great about it. You can
Yeah.
see a wee bit of brown on his nostril when you close in. And then this is the new cover of Pride. So you can see that if that horse is overbent, you'll never know.
Mhm.
And
Because it's
also because he's going away.
mhm.
And I also took into account the spur. I made sure the rider wasn't spurring the horse, things like that.
Which are really important things to consider. And I think particularly first time independent authors that are going into this process, these are all things that you might not know to expect to be aware of. So it's like really fantastic information that you're sharing here, that the equestrian community can get so heated about certain things when it comes to photography for your book cover around the horses.
Hmm.
So
We take things very seriously, and the public can too. So I've worked facing the public in Central Park, and we would wear spurs, things like that, and people, oh, why do you have spurs? Oh, okay, well, we have spurs because we might be riding in traffic, and we might need to nudge our horse sideways very quickly so we don't die. But it looks like we're stabbing our horses with sticks. So it can be for, the general public as well, even outside, to just remove any sort of ambiguity about how we're treating our horses.
That's right. And then when you said helmet, you meant make sure if you're showing a person in a picture of them riding the horse that they're in a helmet, because I just wanted to make sure to clarify that, because grabbing means she's on the ground, she's not wearing a helmet. But if they're on the horse, equestrians get very heated about people not wearing helmets, particularly these days. So something important to consider. Awesome advice. So you kind of stand in, if you're writing a book that prominently features horses, there definitely should be a horse on the cover. Is that right?
If you are going specifically for, this is an equestrian specific novel, this is the horses are characters, you're writing this for horse people to read and understand, then you're probably leaving money on the table if you don't put a horse on the cover. Again, because look at the category. You're competing against all of these other books that have horses on the cover. They're like, well, what is this? I don't know if this is supposed to be here. Sometimes people just drop random books into categories. I have an example, and that's my new book, which is not primarily a horse book. It has a horse setting, but it is primarily a romance. And so I didn't want to say, okay, I'm going to drop this into all the equestrian categories where all of my books always are, because it's not. It just has horses in it. Probably more horses than your average book would, but just the same. What it is it's a setting-based women's fiction novel. So like the ones where you see, 2 deck chairs on the beach, or a country village swagged out for the 4th of July. That's the kind of cover this book's category requires. So that's what I did. So this is the cover. It has a not for resale thing on it, but this is the cover of my new book. So it's got a farmhouse. The farmhouse is literally in the county where I set the book. It's very place driven. So this looks nothing like my other books.
That's true. Yeah.
It's meant to attract a different audience. It's also an experiment. And if it fails, I will change the cover, because they're very easy to change. But I wanted to see what would happen if I put this into women's contemporary and contemporary romance and those categories. And that's what those books look like. So that's what we have.
That's smart. So you're in this is a cool experiment. I can't wait to hear how that goes. And you're back to writing romance. I know you tried your hand at it a while ago, and now you're back. What inspired the romance? Did the story just bubble up and you were like, oh, I'm going to have to follow this? Or
yeah, I started this in March or April at the beginning of lockdown, and I just wanted to go somewhere that wasn't my living room. And I was talking actually to Brittany Joy about this, another great equestrian author, about just sort of wanting to go back to where you were from, that cozy feeling of home. And my family is from Western Maryland, and have a farm that looked really similar to the farm on the cover of this book. And I just wanted to sort of feel that cozy hillsides and cows and horses and no people around, because obviously the last thing we wanted were people around at the time. So it was really a product of the time, was this decision to go ahead and write about Maryland and make it. I decided to make it a romance. It's a dual POV, so male, female, back and forth. Wanted to see, if it's something that I could do that people appreciated and responded to. Maybe there's a whole, separate audience out there from just horse books. I think it can be a palate cleanser to write in different genres from time to time. I know Brittany Joy does the same thing, right? She also writes fantasy. So it can be really pleasant to just take a breath and step away for a few minutes.
Yeah. And as an author of equestrian fiction, you don't have to stay in that lane. You can experiment with trying your hand at other genres and do exactly like you said, clear your palette and, use different parts of your creative mind to tell different stories. So we are not limited to writing horse books. There's horses in your books, but we're not limited just in that stream. You mentioned you had some tips for an author, even if they're not a designer, for ways that they can develop a book cover. Would you share a few of those?
Yeah. So the first thing would be to spend a lot of time looking for your photo. like we talked about. Basically, let's start at the beginning. What is your book cover going to look like? A digital book cover, an ebook first cover, is going to be a picture, a title, and an author's name. And if you've got a series, put the series name in there. It doesn't need a tagline. It doesn't need a whole little like question, like what will she do if he never comes home? The reason being, you can't read those in a thumbnail. It doesn't need wild typography or all sorts of tricks. If you were to Google 2020 cover trends, you would get a whole lot of useless information. The reason is you're not producing books for a bookstore. You're producing books for e-commerce. So it's really, really important to remember what can be seen on the screen. That can mean little flourishes, underlinings, any kind of decoration. Might be over the top. It might take away. That's why, I use images that really speak for themselves and don't need any additives. I might play with the color. And if you want to put embellishments onto your cover, play with your paperback cover. It doesn't need to look exactly like your ebook cover. In terms of tools, if you're not comfortable using Photoshop, there are programs that can do a lot of the work for you. I think people are starting to use Canva for book cover design. I use Adobe Spark for a lot of social media, and I think they have some book cover design. What I would do would be to use something like Adobe Spark and invest the $10 to get access to Adobe fonts. Because using a free font is really obvious, especially that bridesmaid font. It's called like Playlist, I think. And when you see it, for me, when I see Playlist font, it's just like, oh, you just made this on the free version of something. And it looks like, for me, living in Florida, it looks like a t-shirt you'd wear at Disney World. It doesn't really make me feel like, oh, I'm so wowed by this book. I can't wait to read it. It looks like a t-shirt. I'm a bit of a font snob, and I can, I like playing with fonts, and it doesn't need to be involved. Like, you can tell my two favorite fonts because I use them over and over again. I use Baskerville at any given opportunity. It's beautiful and I love it. And this is Trajan Sans Pro. All right. It's an Adobe font. It will do so much heavy lifting for you. It's amazing. I even use it. Yeah. I use it on the inside as well for the headers. And then this is like Adrian something. Super easy to read it from a distance. It does a lot of heavy lifting for you. So if you can find a couple of basic fonts that are really easy to read, just stick with those. Just keep it simple, simple, simple. The big exception to that, I'm going to pull out Linda's book for a minute. I created the paperback of Linda Shantz's amazing book, Good Things Come. She's a rising star. She's a painter, right? And so she wanted to use this particular painting of hers as cover image. She's like, and it works, it's beautiful. But she wanted the font to reflect that it was a painting. And so it was kind of a scrawly font. And the mock-up that she sent me used Playlist because it was, scrawly. So she found this incredible font. And she purchased the license to it and sent it to me. And I used that. It's called Teaspoon. But then we balanced it out with a really basic sans serif font. So there are lots of websites that will tell you like good font combinations. Keep it to 2. You don't need 3 fonts. You never need. There's no need. You don't need 3. And I think that a well-chosen font plus a beautiful cover photo is most of your work. You can honestly do an ebook in 10 minutes once you have the supplies.
And specifically matches your genre, right? That's the most important part. Yeah.
No, your homework and the ability to select the right photo is going to take you hours and hours and hours. Like, if you're looking for a photo, just go ahead and block out a week. Because most stock photography comes from Eastern Europe or Russia. And sometimes you find the right photo, but it's full of Cyrillic writing, or who knows what it says, or you find the right photo, but they've got the halter on upside down, and okay, they do things differently, but it's not going to work here. So
I've seen stock photography where they have like the bit in the middle of the horse's forehead, like tied to opposite sides of the bridle. And I'm like,
oh
what
my
is going
God.
on there? And for newbies, right? So if we have any newbie independent authors that are moving into doing this for the first time, can you talk briefly about stock photography and why it's so important to purchase your photos so you can use them? Because you can't just grab something off the internet and use it as a photo. You have to own the rights to be able to reproduce and do it this way. So can you talk briefly
Right.
about that, just for anyone listening in? There are legal aspects to book cover design too.
Absolutely. And the first thing I want to address is free stock photos. We've all seen them. We've seen every single free stock photo of a horse.
Yes.
Don't use one, because we know. We've seen it. We've seen it in advertisements for GastroGuard, and we've seen it in advertisements for the 4-H, and it's everywhere. Don't use it. It costs $12 to buy from like iStock Photo. I use iStock Photo, Dreams Time. I have used Shutterstock. I think they're more expensive.
I do too. I
Yeah,
agree.
just whenever you sign up for their emails, and whenever iStock has a 20% off thing, buy some credits, and then you have them for when you want to have a photo. And make sure it's creative. The license is creative. Editorial license does not mean you can use it on the cover. But basically, the cheap creative license from a stock photography store will cover you for creating books and for using the imagery for advertisements for your books. It won't cover you for making merchandise for your books. So don't put your cover on a canvas bag unless you check the license, and you might have to buy up. Dreams Time is a little cheaper, and I think that they have some merchandise licenses that are a little cheaper if that's something you really want to do. But be aware that you have to license your images, because somebody eventually is going to say, hey, that's my photo. Especially if you're using a horse photo. If you pull one of, like, I don't know, Shannon Brinkman's photos from like Horse Illustrated, or from an event, or you pull it off the USEF website or something, somebody is going to say, hey, that's me, you can't use that. Or somebody's going to tell Shannon Brinkman, you cannot use that photo, and then you're facing a lawsuit. I did see something really funny with a free stock photo where there was like a barn was running an ad, and somebody wanted to complain about the barn, which is normal. And somebody else said, hey, that is, Sandy What's Her Face jumping at CCI, and does she know that her photo is being used for this? Well, it's one of those stock photos. Like, I've seen the stock photo 100 times. They just pulled it, used it on their website, or like free stock photo. Let me rephrase that. I don't know if she's licensed the use of that. I don't know the legalities of that, but the fact of the matter was, you could be using that photo, that free photo, that is licensed Creative Commons, but the writer may not have licensed that, and it can be caught up in a whole number of other things. So just dig deep, spend the dollars, get the licensed photo, because it's complicated, and you don't want to get involved with media rights issues or anything like that. And
not at all.
It's so easy not to,
Yeah, you want to protect yourself, particularly, because we're making $1 a book. We can't handle, a lawsuit, so
yeah,
it's
no
important.
doubt.
It's important. I wanted to make sure we touched on that legal aspect. So now, can you talk to us a little bit, like we really covered the front cover of the book, have a really beautiful image that speaks to the reader who's looking for similar books, which they like to read, use of fonts, make sure there's no more than 2 different kinds of fonts. Can you talk to us a little bit about things that you consider and you recommend for back of the book cover design? Because that's as important, well, particularly when it comes to paperback, back of book cover design and spine. What are your thoughts on designing those?
Definitely a less is more attitude towards those. If you can get your cover photo to wrap around the spine, fantastic. If you can't, okay. When I look at my traditionally published shelves, I see everything and anything. There's no one rule for how your spine or your back cover should really look like. Most of mine follow a really basic pattern. Pride, I was fortunate enough that the photo was able to wrap around the spine. I think it's really pretty. I had to move where I wanted to put the title because of where the greenery was. So I don't want to go too crazy with drop shadow. I use a little bit of drop shadow and just to make the words pop a little bit, but you don't want to get too crazy with any type effects. And then on the back, it's kind of a longish description, but it's really it's got a heading, it's got 3 paragraphs, it's got this is the second book in the series. It's got my beautiful grinning face and a little bio. And that's pretty much the pattern I use for all of mine. When it comes to writing it, it's usually an edited down version of my book description that I would use for my ebook. And regarding that, less is more again. Don't make a book report. Don't tell me what's going to happen. Just tell me why it's interesting. Tell me who's in it and that they're going to face a challenge and why I should care. I'm reading a book right now that in no place in the book description was there a ghost. And then these 2 people are like, they're having like a little romantic moment. And then there's just one line, the picture of, Mrs. Beasley shattered. And I went, like out loud, like, oh my God, what just happened? And now there's a ghost. I went back and looked. Didn't say there was a ghost anywhere. This is amazing. Who knew there was a ghost? It's fantastic. That's a twist, right? And if you say in your book blurb, and then the ghost appears, it's not a twist anymore, guys. It's just what's going to happen. And so I see loads of people uploading blurbs where they say, this is Jane, and Jane has fallen for Michael. Oh, those are the children of Mary Poppins. Jane has fallen for Anthony. Jane and Anthony must go to Brighton to visit the King's Pavilion. And along the way, they will meet Melanie. Melanie collects seashells. And they just go on and on and on. I don't need any of that. What I need is Jane is in love with Anthony. Anthony is in love with Rochelle. And they're all going to meet on the Brighton Pier for a fun picnic. What will happen? Right? Like that's shorten it up. The seagulls attack. That's the fun twist. The seagulls attack. If you've been, there's seagulls.
Something that happens frequently in Florida, not so frequently in Arizona.
That happened to me the first time I came to Florida as a child. A seagull took my sandwich right out of my hand.
Oh my goodness!
And it has not improved since.
Yeah. And then blurbs are like a whole nother realm, right? And just like you were talking earlier about, there's tools to educate yourself. There are copy editing courses and classes and books that you can read to help you improve the art of the book blurb. Because just like cover design is an art, your back of the cover description and also the description that goes on your book sales pages it's an art, it's another art you can educate yourself on. And I'm glad we touched on that, because a whole lot of the journey of being an author is a lot of educating yourself and learning what works, and a lot of trial and error too. I imagine, you've been doing this for a very long, like how long have you been writing? I mean, you've been writing for a long time.
I've been writing for a long time. I've been publishing for almost 10 years.
Right. So I'm sure your entire journey has been trial and error. So now having gone through all that, you can speak eloquently and share your knowledge on the podcast for other authors to help them out. But you can also help other authors with their book design, having gone through it yourself.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the journey. And, one of the great things about being in self-publishing, obviously, is that you can make a mistake and you don't lose your career. You don't not get renewed. You don't, not get a contract for another book. You don't get out of print because your book didn't sell well for 6 months. You just go, right, let me take some quick courses, brush this up and launch it again, and we'll see what happens this time. And we get to do that over and over and over again. And sometimes we just change stuff because we think it's more fun this way, and experiment and revise and play. And that's if you can embrace the ever-changing nature of it and make it into this long game that you're playing instead of, right, I've written my book, here it is, goodbye, thank you, then it is an amazing journey. Like, I can't believe where I've come from since starting out. And I have my first book proof from the head and not the heart. It wasn't a good cover for the category, but it actually was kind of quite a decent, like, literary fiction sort of chapbook kind of cover. And the first one came out all crinkly and pixelated because I didn't know how to make the file size big enough, stuff like that. So I have it on my shelf. You can't see it, don't ask. But I loved that cover. It was. Sometimes I do think it can be good to indulge yourself for your first. I don't want to say for your first time out, like your first book, and I don't. But like at some point, if there's a cover that you want, make it and have it.
Mhm.
You can be a little self-indulgent, especially if you have other forms of income, to say, right, well, I know it won't sell as many copies this way, but for a little while at least, I really want it to look that way. That's okay, because it's your book.
Mhm.
Just don't misrepresent it to people who are going to purchase it, because it's their money and they're going to respond in kind with reviews that you don't want.
Mhm.
So if I was like, I always wanted to have like a Rita Mae Brown mystery cover, so I'm going to make Grabbing Maine that. Well, that would be really uncool of me, because it's not in any way, shape, or form Rita Mae Brown mystery.
It would be misrepresenting of what the actual story is. So you
Yeah,
certainly don't want to do that. But,
like bait and switch, essentially. Like selling a timeshare.
Yeah, I can only imagine the reviews that would come wheeling in after something like that.
Yeah.
Well, and this is so great. And you mentioned something really important. It's like, you, as an independent author, you have the control. You can change, you can fix, you can update, you can play with it. And that's what's so fun, is you have the control to do that. I'm glad you really mentioned that. Since we're on paperbacks, do you have a preference for size? There's a variety of sizes that authors can choose when they're looking at publishing. There's 6x9, which I think my books are. There's the smaller 5x8. What are your thoughts on paperback size? Do you think is there a standard that you recommend, or do you think it's author's choice, or what do you think?
It can depend on the book a little bit. I have started doing 5x8.25. Which is kind of a standard trade paper size. This is a 5.825. And I selected it when I started putting out, actually, I think my first book was this size. And it was literally just, listen, I've got hundreds and hundreds of trade paperbacks on my shelf, so I had plenty of comparison. And then there's one up from that. Linda's book is the 0.85, slightly taller. I think it works really well. I really like it. The Eventing series is 6x9, which is much taller. I probably chose that. This is the original cover of Ambition, and I probably chose this size to show off the image more than anything else. But that locked me in for what is going at this point to be a 6-book series to 6x9 books next to 5.5 books. Precious. So it wasn't the best decision, but it was also 2013, and it's probably the best decision at the time. Part of it can be pricing for you, because you're paying for production, you're paying in part for page length, right? So you might be able to save a little bit in production costs if your book isn't quite as long when you make it a 6x9 as opposed to when it's like a 5x8 or something like that. Just because there's more room for text, so it can be a little thinner. My books are really long for the genre. They're usually about 100,000 words, which comes out to about 370 pages or so for this size book. So I usually pay like $5.25 for production costs, which is high. I don't make much money off of my paperbacks, but I mostly sell ebooks, so I don't really worry about it, because the paperback it's kind of like a point of pride to me. Like my ebooks are there for you. They will get that story to you, and you will enjoy it, and it is beautiful inside, because I know a whole bunch about PDFs now. But my paperbacks to me are like, oh, you really wanted something for your shelf? Okay, I'm going to give you something gorgeous for your shelf. I'm not messing around.
That's right. And then also, as an author, when you go to author events, people like that physical book, and there still are people that prefer to read a paperback. So having them in both places serves good purpose on both sides, because authors do make a little more from the digital side. A lot of people prefer a digital ebook for their devices, but there's still the people that will only read paperbacks. And then when you go to an author event, you have something special to sign and share with your readers so they can.
That's huge. When you meet people face to face, they want paper. They're not messing around. They'll definitely call you on it if you don't have a physical product to sell to them. Like, where is it? It's on your computer. I am a person who has always read ebooks. I have dozens of ebooks on my phone right now. I have a Kindle, but I've been ordering a lot of paperbacks lately because I'm on my computer constantly and I'm burned out. So now I like to go out, sit down with my book, read my book. And as with so many people on remote work, not in their office anymore, staring at their computer all day long without like breaks, socializing and things like that, I do think paperbacks could tick up in popularity just as a general rule. It's sort of a theory of mine.
Well, there's all these conversations too about breaking screen time. I mean, we're all addicted to our phones and our computers. So like an actual book, it changes, how your eyes are looking at something, and it takes you away from the screen. So I actually see, not just during this time, but I actually see there could be a rise in paperback consumption as well, just given that consciousness about screen time that's been coming up. Natalie, what should an author be aware of when it comes to the creation of the print book cover design and then the digital cover design? Because there's similarities and differences in how that works. What would you share with an author to be on the lookout for when it comes to print design and digital design?
Well, digital covers are tiny, comparatively speaking. You can get away with a really small file size for a digital cover. That's why programs like Canva will let you make a digital cover, and it's just a JPEG. It's practically nothing. Sometimes I'm nervous when I upload. Like, this can't possibly be big enough, and it works out just fine. So that makes them much easier from a design perspective. You just pop it in. Here's my cover, or here's my photo. Here's my title. Here's my name. Wiggle, 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 out the door. They don't need the plussing like I talked about with embellishments, shadowy overlays or little lines or little doohickeys or whatever. Don't bother with any of that. So you can do a digital cover in 20 minutes if you're, really committed to your idea. Paperbacks take time. They're huge files, so you need to have the right program to create those huge files. Sometimes you need the right computer to manage those. Like if you're on an older laptop, your computer might just choke and take you forever to get through the process. They're massive. So generally speaking, you can use most of your ebook cover to create the front of your paperback, but you have to think about your spine. You have to think about the back cover, and you have to decide if you need to move elements around because the absolute size is different. Like on, my Catoctin Creek novel, I had to move up my name on the paperback, and I don't like it as much where it is on the paperback, but c'est la vie. It fit much. There's more bushes on the Kindle cover because it's narrower. And the paperback is wider. So the bushes ended up getting cut out. And then there was a whole thing with color editing that it was only on the Kindle size. And so when I put the cover onto the paperback template, the color changed very abruptly. I was like, oh no. And it was very hard to fix, but I fixed it because I'm a professional. But there was a while where I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make this work. Getting your items onto your template in the right places are extremely important. And if you haven't done a paperback, what I mean is you have to plug in the number of pages your book is to get a template that is the correct size to make your paperback. It is essential that you do not try to make a paperback cover before you know how many pages your book is or the weight of your paper. If you're working with Amazon, they make it very, very easy. They say, right, how many pages is it? And you go, 370. And they go, cream or white? And you go, cream. And it goes, right, here's a template. Because this width is not the same as this width. So I couldn't use the same template for those, even if they were the same height. That is really important. I have had people send me paperback book covers. And I say, oh, this isn't going to work. Why? I haven't even formatted the paperback yet. I don't know how long it is. We don't know how long it is yet because you sent me a Word document. The Word document might say it's 112.
Yeah, that's a great point. You have to upload it into the distribution service like KDP or Amazon's KDP, yeah, to know how long the book is going to be in print, right? And then you go back, you have the cover design, and then you go back later and add it, correct?
It depends on how you make it. You have to have the book file. I make PDFs, so I can look at the PDF and it'll say this is 370 pages, and then that's what I'll type in to Amazon. So I don't necessarily upload it to get that info, but that works too. It just depends on your formatting type. It's absolutely huge. Like if you hit the wrong spine, it comes back to you. Your images have folded over the spine. It's happened to me. It's very sad. You don't want it. And it takes ages to get approved too. So it sets you back 5-6 days every single time you wait for a proof. They're not rushing those to you. They do not care that you are a Prime member. You're going to sit and wait. Basically, ebook, easy. Enjoy yourself. Have fun. Change it up. Paperback, just get ready. It's coming for you.
And I wanted to touch on something too. You design your own book covers because you have a background in graphic design, and that is how you are able to do your interior and your book covers. Now, talk to authors who have no background in graphic design. Talk to them about what they should consider if they're thinking about trying to design their book cover on their own.
I think the best thing to just consider is how many books you're going to write a year. If this is your only book, have somebody else do the cover. If this is a book a year, it might be worth learning how to do. And when I say learning how to do, I mean taking a graphic design course and taking a Photoshop course. When I started publishing, I didn't have a graphic design education, and somebody else did my book covers because I did the first one and it was a flop. It was a disaster. And amazing author Maggie Dana actually did The Head and Not the Heart, Ambition, Other People's Horses, Turning for Home, maybe some others. I don't remember anymore. And I took over at some point and started doing them based on her designs. But in that course of time, I studied marketing, I studied graphic design, I studied Photoshop. And so I armed myself with all the tools I was going to need to put out 3-4 books a year, which was always my goal. So you can acquire this knowledge. You can acquire it very cheaply. I bought a Photoshop course on Black Friday, and it was like 60 hours or something. And I was working, at the time I didn't have a computer with Photoshop, but I had it at an office I was working at. So I just got permission to stay late every day and do an hour of my course, So there's ways, if that's the way you want to educate yourself going forward, to develop all of these skills. And then once you can learn off of a template, you can learn how to, do anything, or off a tutorial, you can sort it out. It's a lot of headache, but if it's what you want to do, spend the time. But if it's a one-off book, or if it's once a year, I don't know that all that time is worth your time, because you don't retain it. And things change. Like there isn't a Photoshop anymore. There is a cloud version of Photoshop, which changes sometimes monthly. Things just vanish. So it can be, you can be looking at, I've acquired all this knowledge last year and now I've written this book and I don't remember what to do and where has the toolbar gone and what am I doing with my life? And then you just spiral. I don't know if it's worth that. And everything that I do, I sort of balance how much is my time worth. So that can, is my time worth somebody else doing this job for me? Often it is.
Yeah. And then if you're doing 4 books a year, investing in educating yourself and how to do it ends up saving you money in the long run. But if you're just publishing once a year, like you said, it's hard to retain that knowledge. And I imagine you're using the Photoshop for because you're doing the graphic design for all your other elements that go under promotion too. So you're really in there using it frequently. So it just depends on use of time. That makes a whole lot of sense. I want listeners to know that this is going to be a special 2-part series because today we've talked about the importance of editing your manuscript. We've talked about book cover design. In our second part of this series, we're going to talk about interior design and get into some other elements of design. But Natalie, talking about book cover design with you has been fascinating. I can't wait to get into the next part of this series and talk about interior design. But you offer design services for authors. Can you talk to us and share with us where authors who are interested in working with you on book cover design can find more information?
Yeah, my website is nataliekreinert.com. And just on the main page, there's, a toolbar at the top, and where it says about, if you hit that drop down, it says ebook formatting and paperback formatting. And there's some examples on there, just some quick images of chapter headings and special title pages and things like that. And then, yeah, just send me an email, natalie@nataliekreinert.com, and I'll get back with you.
Perfect. And of course, I will link to all those services in Natalie's show notes so you can get directly to her quickly. But I wanted to make sure that you knew that she offered these amazing services for fellow authors. Natalie, thank you so much for the gift of your time. And I can't wait to connect again on interior design.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I hope you enjoy these Q&A sessions with wonderful equine authors who love all things horses and riding, just like me. Visit my website, carlycadecreative.com, where you can read the show notes, and make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you so much for your support. Want a free guide to secrets of horsebook authors? Gallop over to carlycadecreative.com/wisdom to have author advice delivered instantly to your inbox. If you are an author who writes about horses and would like to be spotlighted, please let me know. Visit my contact page at carlycadecreative.com to fill out a request. I'd be happy to have you on the show too. Thank you for tuning in to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. See you next time. I'm your host, Carly Cade. Creative writing makes my spurs jingle.